What's up everyone, welcome back to the channel. This week I have a random one for you. We are going to be making a fanny pack. I actually wasn't even planning on making this for this week's video, but I came across this image online and I was more or less just curious how I would model something like this. I rarely make models with fabric like fanny packs, and yes, this would be a great model for a program like ZBrush, but I thought it would be challenging to see what I could do in a few hours using just Maya. Now, I thought I would record the whole process just to share with my patrons, but I was pretty happy with the results, so I decided to share it for this week's video. It also shows a different approach to a model where I really have no idea how I'm going to recreate it and pretty much just wing it along the way. So what I decided to do was start off with a rectangle shape. I thought I could quickly block out the main shapes, and using 3 on my keyboard, I could preview smooth the object and slowly build things up. So I started by adding some edge loops and extruding some of those faces to roughly block out that fanny pack shape. Now things will look pretty bad for a while, as expected, but like usual, you just gotta keep going at it and play around with those vertices until things slowly start to look more like the reference photo. So as you can see, I'm just gonna start blocking out those main pocket shapes. It looks like there's only 2. There's a really small one on the front and then a larger one that's the main one in the back. So I can select those faces and extrude it to create that first pouch, and then I can add a few extra edge loops and extrude a smaller amount of faces for that very front smaller pouch. Now of course things are going to look pretty strange at the beginning. As I preview smooth it, you can see things are starting to look weird, but as I add more edge loops and support some of those edges, I can start refining this shape and moving around those vertices, so hopefully it looks a little bit more like my reference. I also thought it would be much easier and quicker working on just one side, and then once things were more in place, I could duplicate it over and merge it together. So I decided to chop it in half and only focus on one side for the start. Also, in the reference, the material behind those zippers looks different than the others, so I thought I would separate those and make them their own shapes. Alright, so next up is just adding in those front faces for my front pouch. Now all I'm going to do is just insert a small plane, and I can mess around with those vertices to fit into that small area. And I'm also going to extrude a small strip on the very top so I can fit in the area where the zipper is going to go. So all I'm going to do now is just add a small edge loop around that front pouch just so I can help strengthen up that edge. I want to help define that front pouch where it extrudes from the other. And then I'm basically just going to start messing around with vertices and move things around to help make it look more like my reference and hopefully make it look more fabric-like. Alright, so once I had half of the main shape blocked out, which still looks pretty bad at the moment, I decided to duplicate it over and merge it together. I didn't want both sides to look identical, so I wanted to merge it pretty early on so I could start modifying the shape and hopefully make it look more fabric-like and give it some waves and small wrinkles in the fabric material. So I basically just continued to jump in and out of the preview smooth and continue moving around vertices to hopefully make it look more like a fanny pack. Alright, so things are slowly coming together, but the very top of the fanny pack's looking way too flat. So I'm just going to add in some more edge loops, and I can start really messing around with those vertices to make it look more wavy and hopefully more fabric-like. As well as the very sides that go into the very back where the straps are, I want some more tension to be between the very front pouch and where the ends of the straps basically attached to the fanny pack. I want it to look like there's a little bit of tension there, or like the fabric's kind of pulling, basically just hopefully make it look more realistic, because right now things are looking a bit too solid. So let's just continue messing around with some vertices. I also need to add a strip of fabric right where that top zipper is going to go, so I'm just going to duplicate that same shape we created on the bottom, and I can just remove some of those faces and fit it into place right where that zipper goes. Alright, so things are slowly coming together, and it looks quite messy when it's unsmooth with all the vertices all over the place, but once we smooth it out, it's definitely looking more like a fanny pack. Now, in my reference photo, there were two small seams that were basically coming from the very top zipper directly down the back. Now, I could have just easily added this directly into the textures in Substance Painter, but I thought it'd be cool and also fun and kind of challenging as well, just to add that scene directly into the geometry. I feel like we would just have better results when we were rendering up close. So what I'm gonna do is, using my multi-cut tool, I can basically create one edge that goes from the corner of that top zipper directly down the back. And then I can bevel that out and then add one edge loop directly down the middle that hopefully I can just move downwards to create a small bump, basically faking where that seam's gonna go. Now, like usual, I'm not really focusing on topology right now. I just wanna basically get those main forms and shapes into place, and then we can always clean things up afterwards. Ideally, trying to get everything in quads, which we do in the end. Just right now, I'm not focusing on that. It's just gonna allow me to work a little bit more freely, and hopefully I can just focus on getting this fanny pack to look more like a fanny pack. Alright, so I went ahead and did the exact same thing to the other side. I created a seam in the other corner that goes directly down the back of the fanny pack. And like I said, I'm not really focused on topology right now. I just want to make sure everything's looking correct, and then we can always clean things up when we start doing those UVs. Alright, so next up on our list was creating the zipper. Now, I'm not going to focus on making a nice zipper right now. I just want to block out something just so I can start visualizing how it's coming together. So I'm going to start off with a cube, and we can roughly block out what a zipper looks like. Once again, not focusing on getting it perfect right now. We just want to block out that rough shape so I can just start positioning these zippers into the scene. And the whole zipper part, we're gonna just create in the material in Substance Painter. But for the end actual metal piece that dangles down, I wanna create that as geometry because I feel like it's gonna look much better rather than just having a little bump of a zipper in the material. Alright, so that small zipper is blocked out. Now we can create the little dangly part, and that's very straightforward. Just gonna start with another cube, scale that into a rectangle shape, and we can just extrude those outside edges to connect it to our zipper. Alright, so next up on our list is the strap and buckle. Now for the strap, I'm just going to insert a plane and we can create a small little loop and attach it to the end of our fanny pack. And for the buckle, I'm just going to block out a simple buckle that just from an image I found on Google. Now, unfortunately, my recording software just randomly stopped recording. I'm not exactly sure why. And luckily, I caught it just in time, so we didn't miss too much. I just basically created a small buckle, and I'm going to quickly go over that right now so I can show you exactly what I did. So here's an image of a buckle I found on Google Images, and I decided to start off with a cube and basically just start blocking out roughly this shape. So I'm gonna start by adding a few edge loops in the middle, and I can scale those faces inwards so I basically have a rough block out of what that buckle looks like. And then I can delete those outside faces and add a few extra edge loops so I can extrude those faces and give it some thickness so the inside of my buckle is hollowed out. And then I'm just hitting 3 on my keyboard to preview smooth it, and then adding a few edge loops to strengthen up some edges wherever I need them, so hopefully it can look more like my reference photo of the buckle. So that's basically how I recreated my buckle in my scene, as well as the other small piece here that goes inside of it. It's just another small cube, and I extruded some faces using the exact same steps to create the outside buckle piece. Now I was working on this other plastic piece that's going to be on the other side of my belt that basically the other strap goes into and loops around in. And then my software just stopped recording. So we're going to continue on with this object. All I'm going to do is just bevel out those outside edges and add a few extra edge loops. So when I hit 3 on my keyboard and preview smooth it, it retains that shape. And then once I'm happy with it, I can position it on the other side of my fanny pack, and I can continue adding more belts or straps. Now all I need to do here is make sure that it loops correctly inside of this plastic piece I created, and then connects all the way to the other side of my buckle. So I'm just going to follow my reference photo. I'm going to loop it through these plastic pieces, and I can reattach it to my fanny pack. Now, of course, this is much easier just working with one side for my belt, and then once I'm happy with the position, I can extrude it to give it a little bit of thickness. Alright, now before we go ahead and add thickness to our belt strap, we need to just refine our fanny pack a bit more. I wanted to define that edge, basically that seam that goes from that front pouch to the larger pouch in the back. So what I decided to do was select all those faces around that seam and just extrude them, so when I smoothed it out, it created a small little bump, and it looked, in my opinion, a little bit more accurate to the real life image, like an actual seam was there. I also decided to work on the seam a little bit more, so I wanted that seam to fade off a bit on the back of my fanny pack. And I needed everything to be four-sided in faces, so I didn't have any weird artifacts or anything strange happening in the materials later on in Substance Painter. So I just cleaned things up a little bit and messed around with some vertices to make the fabric look a little bit wavy in some of the areas. I also had to extrude some of those edges right where those straps come out of my fanny pack. I wanted to create some depth so it looked like those straps just were attached to the material and they went inside. So I extruded those edges inwards. I added a few edge loops to strengthen up those edges. So once again, when I smoothed things out, it was nice and tight around those straps, and it looked like those two fabric pieces were attached together. Alright, so things are looking good. Now we can jump back to those zippers we were working on earlier. Since we have this shape roughly blocked out, now we just need to refine it. Basically just bevel out some of those edges, extrude the very front to create some depth to where it's attached to the actual zipper fabric. And then we can just position this a little bit better on our model and then duplicate it to create the other zipper right above it. And to be honest, I really didn't spend too long on this zipper. If I could go back, I might have spent a bit more time on this piece. I just really rushed it just so I can get it into the scene and move on to more exciting things. But this is definitely one area where I could have possibly spent a bit more time to get a little bit better shape. But to be honest, I just really simplified it, made it easy, and then just moved on to more fun things. Alright, so for some reason when I was visualizing what this fanny pack looked like, I thought it'd be fun to add some pins on the sides. Not only would it just make it look a bit more unique, but hopefully it would make it more fun to look at. So we're going to make this pin extremely straightforward. We are just going to add a cylinder into the scene, scale that nice and skinny, and I can bevel out that front edge to make it nice and round. And then I decided just to smooth it once so I can make it extra round and smooth. And then we can scale that down and position it on our side of our fanny pack. Now, since we are going to duplicate this pin a bunch of times to create the others, I just want to save myself some extra work, and I'm just going to quickly UV this one right now. So all I'm going to do is a camera-based projection to remove all the cuts, and then using my 3D cut and sew UV tool, I can do a cut directly on the back. Now at the time, I just decided to make 2 cuts, but to be honest, you can just make 1 cut down the side and have 2 faces or 2 UV chunks. But for some reason, I just decided to do it like this at the moment. And then once those UV shells are positioned nicely in my UV map, I can go ahead and start duplicating this pin a few times and position it in different positions all over my fanny pack. Alright, so next up is just adding some thickness to our belt strap. So I'm going to highlight all of those faces, I can extrude it, give it some thickness, and then reposition it so it fits nice and tight around my buckles. Alright, so next up was just adding some more pendants or small little objects that I can attach to the side of my fanny pack. And I thought it'd be fun to add Toad from Super Mario as some little tiny pendant. Now of course my recording software did decide to stop recording, so once again I'm just going to show you exactly what I did to create this tiny little Toad pendant. So all I did was find a Toad image on Google Images, I imported that as an image plane, and I simply just modeled to trace around this image. Luckily the Toad shape was pretty straightforward, so I just basically traced it and then just copied it into my scene. Now I thought it would be also cool to add my logo, the little UFO, as another small pendant on this fanny pack, so that's what we're going to do together. So I'm going to insert a plane to my scene. I can go up to modify, go down to convert, and I can convert a texture into geometry. Now all I'm going to do is just go load in the image that I have saved to my desktop. You can load in any image that you want to basically turn into geometry, and then just hit apply. Now all of a sudden you will see this image appear on this plane with different vertices that are basically traced around the image. Now all I need to do at this point is go in with my target well tool, and I can start merging together all of these unnecessary polys, and I can reposition some wherever needed just to clean up this whole shape. So once things are looking a bit more clean and accurate, I can go ahead and start deleting all of these white faces. So all I have left with is an outline of this UFO shape. Now after doing this, you will find it automatically creates another plane right behind this image. So all I need to do to separate it from this plane is just select a plane, combine it, and then separate it once again. Very strange, but for some reason it works every time. Alright, and then once things are looking good, I can select all of those faces and extrude it upwards to give it some thickness. Now some of those edges were looking a little bit round, so I'm just going to go in and add a few extra edge loops on the top and the bottom just to support those edges. And it's just going to strengthen up those edges and look a bit more accurate to what I had in mind. Once things are looking good, I can scale that nice and small and position that on the side of my fanny pack. Alright, so things are coming together and we're almost done. Now the last object we need to add is that small patch that sits on the very front of the fanny pack. So what I decided to do was select that front pocket, just duplicate it over, select whatever faces I want the size of my patch to be, and then I can just extract it from the model and delete everything else. So all I'm left with is a few planes that's going to be basically that small patch. All I'm going to do next is just add a few edge loops so I can basically start moving some of these vertices around so it could fit a little bit more snug with that front fabric piece. Because I have some waves happening in the fabric, I want the same waves to be replicated in this front patch. So basically it just fakes and looks like it's sewn to that front piece. I'm also going to select those outside edges and extrude it outwards to give it a bit of thickness. That way it's just not looking so flat in my final renders. Alright, so here's the model in its finished form. Now, if you're interested in seeing all of the UVs and the whole video in real time, all of this will be uploaded to my Patreon page, which you can find in the link in the description below, along with all the working files. So if you're interested in seeing any of those, they will all be available. So what I decided to do for the UVs was basically just one group for all of the UVs. There's not many objects in the scene, and I thought they could easily just fit onto one UV map. So one thing that I did make sure to do was all of these pins, basically, I just moved those front face UV chunks over so I can add different pins and different images on each pin. So all of those shells are not overlapping. Everything else, for example, these zippers, they are overlapping, just to save space in my UV map. Now, one thing that I did add that I didn't add in the video was one zipper on the very back. I thought it would be just interesting to look at. It looked a bit plain. I didn't know what to do on the back side of this fanny pack. So I just selected some of those faces and extruded them outwards to give it a bit of thickness and just copied one of these zippers from the front to the back. And as you can obviously tell, I did smooth the object out. So it obviously is going to add more polys to the scene, but to make it look nice and smooth, especially around these edges, I just smoothed it out a bit. But I did try to make everything in quads ahead of time. That way, in a lot of these corners, didn't have any weird pinching or any weird artifacts happening in the geometry. But that's basically how I set this whole fanny pack up. Just one texture, so I just assigned a new material to it, and then we can export this and now jump into Substance Painter so we can start our texturing. Alright, so now jumping over to Substance Painter, we can go ahead and load in our FBX file from Maya. And once everything is looking good, we can go ahead and start baking out those textures. Now, when it came to these textures, I thought I would just try to do them as quick as possible since I'm trying to do this model as fast as I can on my weekend. I don't want to spend too long on these textures, and I'm going to really take advantage of all of these smart materials and different materials that Substance Painter comes with. Alright, so to start things off, we are going to start with our main material that's on our fanny pack. And in Substance Painter, in their materials tab, there is a really great texture that's called fabric nylon. Basically, I'm just entering cheat mode, and if you apply this material, it just comes pretty amazing right off the bat. All I need to do is just mess around with the tiling to make that material a little bit smaller on our fanny pack, as well as change that color from a red to more of a blue. What I decided to do is just follow our reference photo and just basically recreate this image, and then we can add a few extra materials and different fanny pack textures later on once we're done this main texture. Now, along with this awesome fabric nylon material, there is another smart material that's called fabric denim washed out. Now, once again, this is another cheat code material. Basically, it comes with an auto stitching material effect that comes with this whole smart material. And we are basically just gonna steal that out of this folder, as well as a few other folding effects, and we can just copy them and paste them to our blue nylon material that we have applied to our fabric. Like I mentioned at the start, we are going to take advantage of all of these smart materials to save time in this creation of this asset, and then we can quickly wrap things up. Now, once we paste those effects on, things are looking pretty good, but I don't want all of those effects to show exactly where they're showing. So what I'm going to do is group these together into a group, into a folder, and I can basically select that folder and turn it into a white mask, and I can select some dirt brush and start removing some of these effects wherever I want them. For example, there's a large seam right on the very top. I don't want that large seam there, so I can simply just erase it. As well as that stitching color, it comes in a little bit orange or bronze color from that jean material that we took it from, but we want it to be a little bit darker. I was thinking something like black or a little bit more blue, so let's just tweak that color as well. Now, at the moment, all of these materials are applied to everything in my scene, and I don't want those stitching effects to show everywhere. So what I'm going to do is group all of these into one folder. I can turn that into a black mask, and then I can assign it to whatever meshes I want in my scene. Now, I wanted to add a bit more folding or fabric wave effect into this material. So there's another smart material called fabric flannel, and it's really great for another folding effect that it comes with. So I'm going to open up that folder, steal that folding effect from there, and paste it onto my material. Alright, so next up were those areas where the zippers are. And once again, there's a really great material called fabric baseball hat, and there's some really nice striped pattern effect to it that I thought would be really fitting for this area. So I'm going to copy that over, and I can right click, set it to a black mask, and assign it to those meshes. Alright, so next up was creating the actual zipper effect. So I'm going to start off with creating a fill layer. We can drag up that metallic slider all the way. I want it to be a metal effect. And also the height channel, I want to just drag up that height slider as well. Now in my search menu, if I just search zipper, there's this great procedural zipper effect that comes with Substance Painter, and it's very straightforward. All I need to do is make the scaling at the correct size, and I can just draw a zipper effect directly onto my mesh. Now once again, because that metallic and height slider is dragged up, it's going to look like a nice bumpy metal effect where that zipper is showing. And I'm just going to tweak that color as well. I don't want it to be very bright gray. I want it to be a little bit more black like a reference photo. And once things are looking good, I can do the exact same thing and draw in a zipper for the bottom pouch as well. So next up is just adding that small metal piece that sits on the end of the zipper, and Substance also comes with a piece for that. So I'm just going to create another fill layer because I want the metal to be a little bit darker in color so they distinguish from one another. And then I can just double click on that and start pasting that directly on my zipper wherever I want it to show. Now I am going to paste this over top of my zipper, and I will have to go in afterwards and just erase some of the zipper that I created earlier so it's not showing on top of this effect. Now I was experimenting a bit here. I thought it would be cool to try turning that fabric baseball hat material into a black mask, and I can draw around the zipper, and then I can add another leathery, shiny, reflective material directly under the zipper to help distinguish it from the other material so it looked more like a zipper. Now once again, I was just experimenting, and I always suggest and recommend that people do experiment because happy mistakes do happen and it's a real thing, so you just need to try things to see what works. And actually, while I was experimenting with this, I found a different way that I could do it that in my opinion made it look a little bit better. So as you see, once I get to the top zipper, I try a different strategy of just basically assigning the fabric to the whole piece once again, but just erasing it directly over the metal pieces. So it's not showing really a gap between where that zipper is. It almost looks like it's attached to the fabric. And I just found the result a little bit better, so I ended up going back to the bottom zipper and just repeating that same effect. So once again, try things, experiment, because sometimes you just never know what will work. Alright, so next up was working on that small patch on the front, and once again, I'm just going to reuse that denim smart material that we used earlier. I really like the auto-generated stitching effect, and I think it's going to fit perfectly for this specific patch. Now I'm going to turn off most of those layers. I'm going to change that stitching color as well as the main color of the patch from a blue to more of a black. The stitching effect on our blue nylon material is also showing in some areas that I don't want them. So I'm just going to go back to that stitching white mask that I created earlier, and I can just basically erase some of that stitching effect wherever I don't want it. Alright, so next up were those tiny little metal zippers. Now at the time I just decided to use a steel smart material, and I did change this up later on, but at the moment I just want to fill in these empty meshes with some sort of material, and it's going to help me visualize what I want in certain areas, and I can change things up afterwards. Alright, so next up was that large waist strap, and to be honest, I thought that fabric baseball hat material we used earlier would be perfect because I really like that bump straight line effect that it comes with. Now all I'm going to do here is just make sure the rotation is more vertical, and I can make that bump a little bit more obvious, basically just increase the tiling so they're just larger and I can see that bump effect on the strap. So next up were those plastic buckles, and I kept this very straightforward. I just grabbed a random plastic smart material and I can assign it to those plastic pieces. Alright, so next up was doing that front logo on the patch. So I quickly jumped into Photoshop and just made my own alpha for a PR for polyrender. And I just exported that and brought it into my scene as an alpha, and I just basically pasted that directly onto that patch. Now all I'm going to do here is just drag up that height value and drag around those sliders to make it more reflective, and I can simply just trace on around this logo and just create a similar effect that's showing in my reference. So I'm going to make that logo nice and yellow and a little outline of it in a bright green. And then I can use one of those star alphas that come with Substance Painter, and I can simply just paste that on directly onto my patch. So I can basically recreate the same patch that's showing in my reference. I also really like the colors. They were very retro feeling with the light bright pink and green, so I thought that would be also fun just to add into this model. Now bear with me, I am using my mouse instead of a stylus. I'm not using a tablet or anything like that, so this tracing or the outline of this PR is a little rough, and I'm sure you can do it a little bit better, but we're just trying to quickly get through this so we can wrap up this fanny pack. Alright, so next up were all of those small pins. So I quickly jumped on Google Images. I found random pins that I thought would be funny or fitting for this model, and I saved those as PNGs or JPEGs and just dragged those into my file as a texture. So all I'm going to do is just create a new layer for every pin, and using that projection tool I can just project this image directly onto each pin. Now depending on the pin, it will need some work. So for example, the smiley face, it had a black stripe around the outside. I ended up just removing that and just coloring in some yellow. So I will have to tweak some of them to make them fit or look normal or accurate to what a real life pin would look like. But let's just play around with these pins a little bit, and we can fill in these empty meshes with some funny images. Alright, so the pins are looking good. Now I wanted to add a few extra small touches. So for one of them, I just wanted to add a small initial on the bag, like someone wrote on it, just to make it a little bit more unique and fun to look at. And I'm also going to add a little bit of dirt and grunge. So all I'm going to do is add a fill layer, and I can drag on whatever masking effect I think is fitting, just to add a little bit of dirt. Now I don't want to go too crazy. This isn't like a completely abused, really old fanny pack. I want it to be fairly new looking, but I do want it to look used, not like it's basically coming out of a store brand new. And then I also forgot to add that zipper on the back. So what we're going to do is, following the exact same process that we did earlier to create the other zippers, we're just going to do the exact same thing, but this time there's not going to be a fabric piece in the back. This zipper is going to be a different type of zipper, like it's just built into the actual blue material, and it's different from the other ones that are on the front. Alright, so that's basically everything for the textures. So let's jump into that renderer and we can see how everything is looking. Now, of course, there's always going to be something to fix, but I'm pretty happy with how everything is looking, and I thought it'd be fun to add a few variations of colors we can add to our fanny pack. So what I'm going to do is just copy that exact same blue material, the fabric nylon that we have. I can duplicate it a few times and change the colors. So I thought making a green and pink one similar to our logo, to those bright stars, would be very retro feeling and old school feeling, and I thought it'd be fun to add as one of the variations that we can make for this fanny pack. I also thought, since everyone's going back to school and we're entering fall soon enough, I thought a nice orange would be fitting for a fall themed fanny pack. Now, there are a ton of different materials and fabrics that you can find on the Substance Source website, and if you're paying for Substance Painter, I'm pretty sure it's free for all users. So I decided to jump on their website to download 2 different materials I thought would be really fitting for this fanny pack. The first one was a striped pattern jersey effect, and to be honest, this one was great in my opinion. It's like a cool pattern effect that I thought would be a great variation we can add as one of the options for our fanny pack. And the second one was a flower pattern, similar to the jersey pattern. It's just a different pattern effect, and I thought it'd be fun. Rather than having plain colors, we can have some different patterns as well. So you can go crazy. There's so many different materials available on that website, so definitely look into it if you haven't, and there's lots to choose from. Now, I did decide quickly to jump back to those metal zipper pieces. Those flat planes were looking a bit too plain in my opinion, so I thought I would add some sort of branding or bump effect that you'd usually see on a lot of these. So I just decided P-render for polyrender, and then added some alpha to just basically print directly onto it. Just another small detail I thought would be fun to add. Alright, so at this point I thought we were basically wrapping things up, and just at the very end I decided to add one extra small detail, which I will go over right now. So just before I was about to render it out, I was taking a look at everything, and like I said, I did end up changing that black line that was around the outside of the smiley face. I thought it just looked better all yellow. But I did decide to add these small markings on the back. So it was looking a bit too plain and I didn't know what I wanted to add, and I thought it would be more of a young person's fanny pack, possibly just by these certain pins that I have chosen to stick on here. But I thought it'd be fun to add a few extra markings like someone drew with their marker. Now I purposely went in and made them very sloppy because I thought it would just be fitting for the whole piece, but I just decided to draw in a couple stars, this classic S thing, I don't know, I'm sure many of you have seen when you were younger, and then a little initial or a K plus J in the side, just to make it more personalized. And once again, those tiny little details can go a long way. And I also thought these pins were funny. Anyways, that is basically everything. That is the whole texturing and 3D modeling process that I did to create this fanny pack. I really hope you guys enjoyed this week's video. If you did, smash that like button, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel to see more random weekly 3D models. Also, as always, a big shout out to all of my patrons. Thank you so much for all of your continuous support. You guys are all amazing. And once again, if you want to see any of this in a real-time pace, as well as see the whole UV mapping process, or you just want to see those working files, all of that will be available on my Patreon, which you can check out in the link in the description below. Once again, thank you so much for tuning into this week's video, and I will catch you guys in the next one.